And so our session is really about thinking about what participatoriness looks like within the African context. So both Vincent and I and Kauna come from a little bit different types of um, backgrounds in terms of how we think of AI. But perhaps let me just start by introducing myself. My name is Angela Chukunzira. I'm currently a Mozilla Fellow hosted at Siasa Place. So I look into building worker movements, cross-sectoral movements, one of them being AI data workers. And maybe we'll go around and introduce ourselves and then we'll come back to me. So Vincent and then Kauna.
Thank you very much. My name is Vincent Obia, and I'm glad to be here. It's been a pleasure working on this project with Angela over the past few months. Lots of ups and downs, but finally we're here. My name is Vincent. So I'm here as a Level Him Early Career Fellow at the University of Sheffield. I'm doing research into AI governance in Africa. So that means I get to interact with stakeholders, some of whom are in the room here. So that's like a good privilege for me to get to hear from them and their perspectives and to see how that can shape AI governance on the continent, including these participatory approaches that we can consider to governance on the continent. So that's really a pleasure for me, and I'm glad to be here. So thank you. Kauna, if she's here.
Yeah, she was struggling with network. Oh, I can see her.
I don't think she's going to be able to come off mute unless I allow it. Sorry, who are we hoping to speak?
Kauna Malgui.
Oh, no, lovely.
And I'm not sure if Rob.
Kauna, please unmute yourself.
Okay.
Kauna, you're still on mute.
All right, now I can. Hi everyone. Good day, good morning from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Kauna Malgui. I'm a former Facebook content moderator. I'm also one of the steering committee members of the African Content Moderators Union, which bettered out of the precarity that the moderators faced while working on the AI systems and platforms. So I'm happy today to have this conversation and also to discuss how workers are also not included, or what are the ways that workers can be part of these participatory approaches in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kauna. So glad to have you. Despite all of the challenges with network and all that. So thank you so very much for making out the time. I think we're supposed to have a fourth speaker, Rodrigue. I don't know if Rodrigue is here or not. I
He
sent him.
hasn't come in yet.
Yeah, so he mentioned that he'll be traveling, so that might be a challenge. Okay, so I guess we can start. Given the fact that we don't have so much time. So thank you all for being here today. So the question of participatoriness in Africa when it comes to AI development and governance in Africa, I think for me it has been like a journey just to see how participatoriness has evolved or is evolving on the continent and how stakeholders embed it into their practices. So whether that be AI developers, whether that be governance experts, policymakers, the importance of participatoriness in that approach. And I guess for me, the idea, and I'll still open the floor to Angela and Kauna, but the idea for me is how participatoriness is intrinsically linked with the question of power. And so the power discusses on participatoriness. So whoever gets to participate in AI development, in AI deployment, design, governance, whatever it may be, it is that those are the people who have the power to determine how the technology evolves, how the technology manifests in different spheres. So at the moment, it might seem like the major tech barons, tech companies are the ones who get to define how that technology evolves, and the major countries on the continent in the world. So the major powers, the US, China, to some extent, the European Union, getting to define how that technology evolves. And so that means those who do not have the place, a seat at the table, might not really then get to determine how that technology comes out. So the data workers, for instance, even the users themselves, those who are like the laborers, workers, all kinds of people, civil society activists, the grassroots stakeholders, might not get to have a say in how this technology evolves. And when that is lacking, it then means that question of power is really influences. So for me, that's like where I really I'm trying to position my own theories and thinking around how participatoriness shapes AI development and governance in African countries, and to a large extent to how that interacts with the various processes around the world. Angela?
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. And that you're raising the issue of power. I was just looking at the news recently. I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, when the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was in Munich. And one of the statements he made specifically about AI was that the West should control key minerals and supply chains, invest in space travel and artificial intelligence, and work together to win markets in the global south. That's his statement.
Mm.
And so when you think about power and when you also think from the historical perspective of Africa and the political economy of AI as it's actually currently shaped, I kind of see a replication of colonialism in one way or another. So this is AI is very reminiscent of colonialism in terms of how it's being shaped, how it's being brought, how it's actually being packaged, right? Especially when you're talking about power and the power dynamics. So it's the powerful countries, it's the EU, it's the US actually, US imperialism majorly because most of the companies are actually US companies, right? We talk of
Yeah.
Amazon, we talk of Google, whatever, all that. Um, and so participatoriness in this context and how even the powers that are in place look at it is like we are passive consumers of AI. And we can actually see some of the challenges in the power asymmetry. It's not only about power in terms of geopolitics, etc., but also in terms of power, for example, not everyone can join the panel because you don't have electricity, right? Or you simply do not have the tools. And even if you have the tools, the infrastructure is not there. So what does participation looks like? Like it's almost such a paradox, and we're really at the basic stage of where we're talking about deployment and development of AI. So digital divide is exacerbated, of course, when you think of even people accessing electricity, and then now how do we access AI tools, or how do you participate in AI, and also how it's even conceived. For example, and I can't wait to invite Kauna to give more concrete examples, is like when people are designing cars, workers who are designing AI, they're designing Tesla in Nairobi, a place that does not have infrastructure to drive that car, right? So what is participation in our context? Like I really want to kind of ponder when you think of participation in AI, I really want to ponder like what does it mean in our context? There are power dynamics, there's the replication of colonialism, there's also the state, right? And worker agency, because we are not just passive people. We think of like how do we participate or how do we reject what is being given to us? And perhaps maybe I would invite Kauna to think of, because we're still talking about AI at its development stages in the continent, and Kauna can give context because she was part of the African Content Moderators Union. She's also part of the Africa Tech Workers Movement, which actually has a lot of data labelers. Data labelers association are key. So Kauna, kindly unmute.
Kauna, normally you should have received a notification to unmute yourself.
Yeah, she is also co-host, so should be able to.
Kauna, can you hear us?
Thank you, Angela and Vincent.
Okay.
Now?
Yes,
All right. Can you hear me?
yes,
Yes,
we can. Oh,
I think yeah. So just what we're talking about, connectivity and who has the power or the option, access to participate. Yeah, so it speaks to a lot, I think. So what you're saying around colonialism, and so I've read quite a lot around data colonialism and digital colonialism, and also around coloniality also, and how that. So these are like different concepts and how they all affect how different stakeholders might get to influence different kinds of processes. And I guess when it comes to like AI development, I don't know about how you see it, Angela, and I was also hoping that Kauna will be here to speak about this. Since she has done a lot in that space, working at being a data worker or a previous data worker. the extent to which AI developers themselves go out of their way to include different kinds of perspectives in the designing these technologies. So we know of the examples of like probably OpenAI and somewhere in American tech companies where there have been allegations of bias in the way and discrimination in the way in which the kinds of data that are used to build or build these models. The fact that they sometimes most times lack the context that can speak to populations in the global south, including Africa. And so there's the question of bias and all of that, and how that then means a section of the global population is actually excluded from some of these discussions and interactions. And I guess for me then it's also to speak to developers on the continent. The question for me is then how do developers on the continent also try to account for some of these shortcomings to ensure that in designing their own tools, because we have so many of them in Africa now that are coming up with LLMs. So we know of Masakane, they are also trying to also do a lot in this space to develop African-based LLMs, African languages, ensuring that these languages are not left out in this global race to develop AI. And one question that I've always had in mind is how do African developers also ensure that they do not fall into the same trap, to ensure that they also go out of their way to include the voices of, including, the marginalized, those who are easily left out of the process, those who are easy to ignore. How do they go out of their way to ensure that their perspectives are embedded in the design of their technologies? And that's a question for me. Okay.
Kauna is in. Kauna, you can keep your video off if that helps with the bandwidth.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Okay,
I believe you can hear me now.
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
I'm so sorry about that. And I think this is one of the issues that we're also discussing. I'm currently in Abuja, Nigeria, and it's been 3 days. We don't have electricity. So I tried my best to just get someone charge a power bank to bring to me just to be here. But it's just part of what we're talking about, that participation in Africa is a real big deal. You have the platform, but sometimes how do I even get to those platforms when the internet is not even good? You don't even have electricity, the basic things that you need to even voice out your experience. I was a former Facebook content moderator. I worked in Nairobi, and part of my experience, I would say, as someone who has trained the AI systems, is even being invisible. As a worker, I'm not supposed to say I worked and I train AI systems because I was told I would be jailed for 20 years. So how do I participate as a worker? How does that bring out the experiences of these workers? And how does that also bring even the African perspective into the kind of work that we do? Talking about even the platforms that have been made available, because the first thing these big tech companies will tell you is we do public engagements. We try to hear from the people, the workers themselves, to tell us like their own feedback. But from my own personal experience, even for the 4 years that we've worked, we have feedbacks that we never got. We had feedback for this organization that we never got a response for it. So it's just like, yes, we know that there's an issue, but since it's an African issue, we don't even want to talk about it. We don't even want to talk about it. So these are the issues that I would say. I've already been distracted with all that is happening around me because I was trying to get this settled, but I'm trying to give my point as much as I can. But workers' voices are never heard, especially African workers, because they don't even have the platform, they don't have the voice, they don't even have the opportunity to be where they are supposed to be represented. So I would just buttress what even Angela have said again regarding the power dynamics that is in this space. So the power dynamics is only what can we profit, what can we get out of this job that we are doing. And it's only benefits the big tech, the government, and the people in power, not actually people from the grassroots who have the actual feedback and knows exactly what is happening in these spaces and what needs to change. to be able to have everyone on board.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, fascinating. So the fact that you have that experience as a data worker, I think it brings a lot to this discussion. Oh, she's gone again. I wanted to ask if, like, really a follow-up question. Like I wanted to ask her around like the question around the fact that she has been in this, so she has moved from being like a worker also to being in a civil society space, leading the
Yes.
Data Workers Union and all of that. And the extent to which she has been this voice on the continent, the extent to which she has also been included, or the extent to which she's involved in participatory conversations, either by AI developers or by governance experts or by policymakers, to ensure that our wealth of experience is also captured in some of these developments. And so that was something I wanted to ask her, but to see what she has to say about that. She's gone again.
Yeah, but Vincent, I think when you're speaking of when you speak of participation and Kauna's experience that actually enriches us, and having worked with some of the content moderators and some of the data labelers, one thing that is actually for me it's two-sided in terms of AI governance is also thinking about civil society, right? Civil society, because when you think of governance in general, how there's increasing repression of civil society in the context of East Africa, at least that, when you think of Ugandan elections, you've seen it was like a sham of elections. They switch off the internet. Civil society is not allowed to voice any opinion, and it happens across the board, right? So when civil society is actually silenced, what happens is that the unions actually become yellow unions, for instance. Unions become weakened. And so when you're thinking of even setting up something like the African Content Moderators Union, on one hand, it was not possible to set it up because their efforts were being sabotaged. They got a letter from the authorities saying, oh, you actually cannot register this union. Alternatively, you can join this existing union, where young people do not see themselves existing in those unions, but because it's like led by the old guard. And secondly, also people seeing like now the state has interfered in terms of wanting to build a stronger union. So how are workers now having to be forced to reorganize themselves, right? And for me, I think like even what we're talking specifically about AI governance, but it's really tied to governance in a general sense. Like when you're thinking of traditional governance, AI governance just ties into what traditional governance is, because if there's no civic space, there's no freedom of the press, there's no vibrant civil society, that actually directly affects workers. When Kauna speaks of her experience, for instance, union busting was very common. When they were trying to build the African Content Moderators Union, there was no freedom of association. And this was something that, when there's no vibrant civil society, then who is able to advocate? Who's able to actually voice for these workers? And this is actually at the very lowest level of AI governance when you think about it, because this is about the development of AI. So we're developing AI at this micro level, right, where we're ensuring that there's a vibrant civil society. It's very fundamental to ensure that when you're thinking of AI governance, even globally and holistically, much more broadly, we are thinking of, okay, what is the civil society environment in Kenya looking like today? And how does that shape how AI is actually being governed?
Yeah.
What's the state of the unions? Oh, I wish Kauna was here to be able
No,
to,
she's back. She's back now. She's back now, but I don't know if she can unmute.
or if she had
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, she's back.
All right, thank you. So thank you, Angela. The internet keeps kicking me out. On the point of having a union, just like Angela have explained, we were asked to join an existing union, which we did. And unfortunately, I was one of the people who were the union organizers. I woke up one day and I was fired and I have a 2 years contract with the union. I was fired 1 year into my contract. Why? Because they said I was too close to the workers. I am too concerned with the workers' issues. Angela will laugh because we would always talk about that. I think she's the first person I reached out to. I'm like, what are these people saying? I was literally kicked out from the organization where the workers, the content moderators are, and the workers are, that we were organizing, because they said there's a way I organize the workers and they listen to me, so they don't want to see me in the building. I will be arrested and deported. And the employer, which is the union, said, no, don't go there. These guys don't want you there. So you can really see the real deep issues that which is not out there that people don't know when we talk about the participatory involvement of workers in this conversation. Workers are being silenced in everywhere because it's a yellow union, and these are the unions that the government told us go and join. So you can see the same government who also said these workers are too noisy, they are causing a lot of issues, they are sending out the investors, because I am also one of the petitioners who sued Meta in Kenya. And we also had to sue the government because we wrote to them, we want to participate in this conversation before you pass a law that clearly states that big tech companies cannot be sued in Kenya. And we're like, no, can you hear from the workers? What are these big tech companies actually doing? Paying workers less than $1, $0.00 per hour for the jobs that is being done for over $30 per hour. But because they bring it to Africa, this is how it's paid and the working conditions. And this is the same government who referred us to a union. So I'm sure your guess is as good as mine, that you can see is totally arranged in a way that it will shut the workers. So how can workers be participating in such conversations? Because clearly those people who will tell you, oh, we are doing the right thing, the workers are being protected, we speak for the workers, are actually not the workers themselves, which you can see that there is a huge, huge problem right there.
Yeah, and I think I think you've elaborated on some of these issues. The fact that, and I also the example of the Kenyan president who was like, he had this town hall meeting where he was. So you sent me the video, so thank you for sending it. Where he was saying that tech workers are disturbing, they're causing trouble, so they're chasing away Sama and other tech investors from creating jobs in Kenya, and that he will create a law to protect those tech companies so that they cannot be sued or disturbed by the civil society actors. So I guess that speaks a lot to some of these issues. And I don't know if you want to comment on that as well.
Yeah, so I would say that was the genesis, because after then the law passed. I'm not too good into the legal things as much, but I knew we wrote a letter and told them that we want to say our own side to the government. Like, okay, you are doing a public participation. Now we want to talk about this. They ignored that stage completely and moved. I think it went to the second reading and then to the third reading, which we ended up in court to sue them and say they skipped this and it's not even representing the workers who are actually doing this work. But you can imagine for people like us who are actually doing the work, what does it mean for us? Because now the precarity you've already faced from moderating contents for 4 years, you cannot sleep, the mental health issues. And then now, okay, you join the union thinking that finally you can be able now to bring whatever you have in mind into practice so that other workers also can have a voice and also be participatory in the things that they are supposed to speak up for themselves. You end up getting fired and victimized, and even being threatened to be taken to court by the same union, which is said to protect the workers. So we can see that the issues is really rotten from down within, but how can we really bring this? And that is why I'm here. I said, regardless, I just have to be here to just talk about these issues, because workers like us are facing a lot. You don't even have a job, which means you are vulnerable to even, we've seen some of our colleagues who had to be paid off by some of these platforms and be like, sign off your rights, we're going to pay you $20,000, don't speak about us, and which they did because of the precarity. They don't have a job, they need to eat and all that. So what does it really look like on the ground in reality?
Yeah. I think, I think that also speaks to many of these issues around. I think for me, it goes back to the question of power. As you were speaking, the fact that the government and the tech companies are like working together as partners in this way, to really silence, ultimately silence, but at least in a way marginalize the voices of those who are not as privileged. And I guess for me, the experience for me, so I'm Nigerian, so the experience for this in terms of this development, how the extent to which people are included in participatory conversations on AI governance in Nigeria is something that I've also found to be questionable in many ways. I think Nigeria is not as we don't have the case in Kenya where tech companies are employing data workers as much. I think they are there, but it's not as pronounced as in Kenya. But there's also that question of the ways in which policies are developed by the government. And I get a sense that people are still not as included as it should be. Me, for one, I don't, sometimes I just get to see, oh, there's a new bill, there's a new strategy, there's a new policy. And I'm wondering, I didn't even know it was even it was being deliberated. All I'm just seeing the final output, and then I'm having to go through the final output. Sometimes months or years after it has been released, when I'm finally getting to, oh, there's something that's been published. And I think that also speaks to the way in which, yeah, you want to come in?
No, when just your comments caught me because I'm thinking when you're talking about AI governance and
Mm,
participation, right? There's also always a gap. And Kauna partly mentioned it in terms of the legality, right? So the
mm,
legal framework vis-a-vis how AI is actually developing, the rapidness and the quick evolution, there's never a match of it, right?
yeah.
So when you're talking of AI governance, like I'm very curious to hear from you, Vincent, actually. Like
Mm,
from a legal perspective, because we say also like, what is the African Union doing? What are the African states doing in terms of protecting people? Because
mm,
there's also the issue of workers, yes, which is one aspect of it. But even when you think of privacy, when you
mm,
think of data governance, more holistically, and how like yeah, 2 weeks ago, something people were creating caricatures of themselves on ChatGPT. Like,
mm,
how is our data being protected, or how are we even being given information at the very least? Because these things are just trends, like very quick and easy, and that's gone. That's gone. So, like, how AI and all these technologies are being developed vis-a-vis the pace of the legal framework and also information,
mm.
right? So, how do we balance that? Because information also speaks to this.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge, the pace of technological change. So that's something that policymakers are always struggling to catch up with. That's established fact. And some of them have proposed they need to develop flexible laws that can evolve as the technology evolves also. But it's a very big challenge, especially in African countries where sometimes when you're developing some of this data protection, whatever it is, before you know it, the news, something else comes up a lot further down the line, and then you have to go back to the new structure. But some of the ways that have been proposed to deal with this is to just say, you know what, let's use existing laws. We don't have to be creating new laws for OpenAI, a new law for ChatGPT, a new law for Gemini, for whatever.
Yeah.
We have those existing laws. As Kawana was speaking, for in the data workers perspective, we have labor laws in Nigeria, and I know the one in Kenya where they said the Kenya labor law is very weak, but we have the labor laws in several countries. They can be strengthened to, to curb some of these excesses so that people can then be included. You can begin to make some of these provisions in the laws, existing laws on data, on labor, on the environment, on healthcare, on in education, different ways. If you're going to create an AI tool for healthcare, you have to ensure that these standards are met. And is a law on health. It's not just it's a law on health, but because you're creating an AI tool for health, you have to abide by those policies. And so it can also be mandated that they have to include some voices there to ensure that people are included the voices of people are included in how these laws or and how these tools are developed by the AI tech companies. So I think that's a way to deal with that to ensure that because the technology is always so much faster than the pace at which law develops. That's just established fact. And then the question around data and how African creating caricatures on ChatGPT and the data privacy implications. I think that's like a massive challenge. I think recently we had African countries who are now trying to step up to the plate. So we had in 2024, we had the case of Nigeria taking on Meta, finding Meta like $100 and something million dollars. Oh no, it was $200 and something million dollars, really quite substantial for some data infractions. And I believe the case is still in court. There was a part that was settled out of court, but the main case is still somewhere still being debated in court. And there was also this case of Uganda. I heard about Uganda last year, and Google. Uganda actually fining Google also for some data infractions. So it speaks to the ways in which some African countries are trying to flex their muscles, but I still think there's that wider challenge around the power imbalance in some ways. Yeah, and I think that might speak to the need for an African Union. So you also spoke about the African Union and what is the African Union doing? So the African Union is trying its best from what I can see, but I think the challenges are just so. I think the African Union is a bit slow in catching up with some of these developments and the problem of trying to coordinate a continental voice. Like the European Union has some kind of a voice, although the EU is suffering right now because of the backlash they're getting from America and some of these tech companies. So the EU is actually dialing back on some of its own laws, like its own AI Act. But in Africa, it's hard to have that one voice and to speak with one voice with a strong note. It's just so that question of power and leverage comes back again. So African might, even if they do speak with one voice, it might not come with the same measure of power. I don't know how to describe. So it then means that the African Union can be quite toothless in a number of ways. And until I believe the larger question for me is until we begin to solve the questions around infrastructure, around computing power, around data access or data itself, having data for tech development, ensuring that Africa has all of these infrastructures and tools in place so that we can then have a seat at the table and become more relevant, if I can use that term, in actually contributing to some of the conversations at the global level and shaping participation at that global level. I think until we have that, then yeah, it's going to be quite challenging.
Yeah, I was hoping that the other speaker will have joined us
Yeah,
by now.
I don't know.
I don't want to not check and then he would be
Rodrigo.
here.
I sent
Rodrigo,
him, he hasn't responded to my email.
yeah, because he was the one to speak a lot more on governance. But even then, like you keep coming back to this question of power, right? Vincent, you still come back to like it's still a power imbalance. It's still a power imbalance. But for me, I would also say there's the power imbalance, of course, and this is historical and also how the political economy of AI is shaped. But then I think the best way to challenge it is to strengthen civil society. That's how I've seen it. That's how I've seen um, how this can be partly solved. And maybe I don't know if Kauna is here, because one of the ways we have now built an African tech workers movement is literally building a movement from scratch that is transnational, right? Because when Meta left Kenya, they went to Ghana, right? And the workers in Ghana are going through the same things that workers in Kenya went through. So, it's a power game. But if we build a civil society that is strong, that can agitate for human right, even from a human rights perspective, right? And say like you can't do what you want in Kenya, you can't do, and they'll always threaten, we'll go to Uganda then, we'll go to Nigeria tomorrow, whatever. So the fact that we want to ensure that we build a continental-wide civil society that's strong, like a social movement that can be able to embed all these workers' rights across the country, so across the countries in the continent. So when Kauna is in Nigeria, she's talking to tech workers in Nigeria, and tech workers is not just like only the data labelers, right? It's across the board. It can be content moderators, it can be Uber drivers, e-hailing drivers who are also using tech, like they're also under this multinational chain hold of big tech, right? And perhaps maybe Kauna can speak to that in terms of what does civil society strengthening look like in practice, because then we cannot say we want the AU is like toothless, whatever, or our governments are in bed with big tech. So what happens? Like, because people must have agency. That is how you build power, right? That's how you counteract. That's how the colonial movements actually managed to, take power back.
Yeah.
Kauna?
All right. So thank you, Angela. I would say the African tech workers movement is one that I have been passionate about. We started it in Kenya, which Angela, Siasa Place, Oversight Lab, Mercy, and all that have been actively part of this movement to bring all workers from all over Africa to come together. And I think the civil society have been helpful to us as far. We've worked with Siasa Place, we've seen the Oversight Lab, which was very helpful to bring in Uber riders, e-hailing drivers, of course, data workers, data labelers, content moderators, and all these forms of data work together and then build a movement across Africa. But of course, we have challenges. And one of the challenges would come even from funding. How are fundings being gotten for such movements? Because we can see big tech companies and all these other companies would have a lot of money to give to pro big tech companies and organizations and societies. But we, on the flip side, organizations or movements that are really fighting against this usually would have limited kind of global support and international support, leaving even the organizers being in a precarious situation because you cannot be paid for the time invested in that work. What does that mean to also the movement? Because these are people who are going through challenges, mental health issues that they need resources to take care of themselves or even need services such as free mental health support to support themselves. But unfortunately, we don't have them. And it's also for people who are listening to also think about this and see if there are ways that we can all come up and also provide spaces where these workers can get the support even as they build these movements, because the movements cannot be built without nothing. Resources are needed, guidance are needed, mentorship are needed, and also well-being, because well-being is very much not discussed. The mental health part of this whole conversation is usually very not even discussed at all most of the times. So the mental health toll is very, very serious because we've seen some of our colleagues attempted suicide, failed, some succeeded, some in a very bad state, they've turned into substance abuse. So when we talk about AI, we cannot just talk about it, we would also talk about how it affects even to the mental health of these specific workers. And part of what I have also done is to provide, as an organization, with the help of civil society, of course, is to provide pro bono mental health support for workers. But of course, it's limited. We can only do little. So right now we're giving 15, just for 15 workers. And we have 15 workers across Africa, Nigeria, that is Kenya, South Africa, Uganda. So the 15 is very little compared to the numerous workers that need this help, but they cannot afford it. And what does this really mean to these workers and how these AI systems are built? Because if I'm not mentally sound, it means that when I'm training these AI systems, my sentiments, my personal beliefs, all these things will come into it. Because most people think it's just a system that comes up by itself. We've seen it when we're training the AI systems for Facebook, where if it's an African content, especially as an African, you feel something because these are things that you relate to, you know, and you have to teach these systems how it's been done. But it also depends on how I'm treated, because sometimes when I have 10,000 content or things to do or to instruct or to teach in a minimum of 50 seconds, a maximum of 15 seconds, to make an action. What does that really mean on what I'm really imputing or teaching these AI systems? So there's a whole connection to the mental health of these workers, their living condition, their working conditions, and also the times that they are being given to do this kind of work. How does it look like? That also affects the kind of AI systems we're going to see in the next future that unfortunately will all be users of it in the coming years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that also, so I think the need for mental health support, as you rightly raised, is a key issue that is still lacking for many. And I don't know how we can go forward in addressing that at that scale, the scale at which it is needed. I think that's a major challenge. And I guess for me also, when it comes to the question of participation in AI governance, because Angela, you're asking around governance and the feelers that I get from how participation is embedded in AI governance globally. And I don't know when we open the floor to Q&A. When should we open the floor to the audience?
At 45.
Okay. So the feelers I get around AI governance is some. So I was speaking with an expert who mentioned that in a country like Mozambique, for instance, the government is actually willing to go out of its way to include the voices of citizens in the policies on AI that it develops. But the question that they face is the question of how expensive that will be. So how do they even do that practically? How do they reach out to people in communities and villages? Some of them don't have internet connection. So if they release an online survey to like, okay, if you want to comment on this policy, it's only people with internet access that can actually comment. Maybe sometimes. So it's actually, we see that divide. So only the elites, maybe the educated, those who have internet access, they can there to comment on the law. So the wider population is effectively left out. And then creating a system where you get to reach out to them in person in their various hamlets is just how expensive that will be. And then time again, considering that AI is such a fast-moving piece. By the time you're done with the consultation around the country, 10 years have gone by. And then
Mm.
technology has moved again. And so it becomes like that challenge that in terms of actually how can participation actually how can it be achieved on the ground in reality when it comes to governance to ensure that voices of key actors are not left out. So what ends up happening is that they just do some kind of representative sample. Okay, we need somebody from academia. Okay, we need somebody from law. Okay, we need somebody from health. And they just have these representations. And yeah, so it's not very clear as to how that can actually then in the broader sense. And also when policies are being developed, it depends on who the main contractor or the main lead person is. So the lead person actually affects it a lot. So if the lead person is an economist, that AI policy is going to lean heavily towards economics. If the lead person is a lawyer, you see a lot of data protection and rights and heavily in terms of law and all of that. So if the lead person is an agriculturalist, you get to see these policies about how we can strengthen agriculture in this country. So it depends on who the lead person is also in some of these conversations. And I guess how we can strike that balance to ensure that even in developing these strategies or policies for AI in African countries, there is that breadth of experience so that a lot of perspectives can be captured in how they are shaped.
Yeah, and Vincent, maybe perhaps before we go to the Q&A, one thing that I think we have missed on mentioning in terms of participation in AI, like we've talked about labor a lot because of, Kauna's presence and my own background, etc. But I think also another thing that's fundamentally missing at the moment in African conversation around participation in AI is the environmental aspect of it, right? Because the critical minerals that are needed, the rare earth minerals, the cobalt, the whatever, the lithium, they're found in the DRC, right? And you can actually see, like when we started this, we were talking about colonialism and um, and how colonialism is in continuum, even as we're thinking of AI and participation. But when you're thinking of critical earth minerals that are actually being mined in the continent, for instance, these are communities that are entirely being displaced. There's a genocide going on in Congo, and nobody's talking about it. President Shikedi, the president of the DRC, was with Trump, and they're signing new deals. So it's not. It doesn't look like the colonialism, the classic colonialism, but it's actually a colonialism where people's land property is actually just being taken away from them, or even the environmental issues are not being like, because when multinationals are coming in, they're given special economic zones, so they bypass even environmental assessments, and they're able to just mine things, minerals, with no concern for the environment. So yes, this is when you're talking of participation, it needs to come down to like the entire transparency of the supply chain. Thinking of, okay, these are minerals coming from the DRC. How do we think of safety, right? And how do we think of actually distributing the wealth to the people who these minerals are coming from? They're the poorest of the poor areas where the minerals are coming from to develop the system. So, and also the labor conditions, not only for the labelers who are like the data labelers, but also for the people in the mines. These are people who are doing, children are being exploited. And this was even before AI, when you're thinking of just the mining industry on its own, right? The health implications on people, on the environment as well, like just the degradation. Like the Congo Basin is literally the lung of the continent, and it's being deforested left, right, center, like for multinational and corporate interests. So like when you're talking about AI governance and AI participation, it comes down to transparency of the supply chain, but also ensuring that there's sustainability within it, right?
Yeah.
And I actually hate the word sustainability because it kind of like maintaining the status quo. Some things must stop. Like
Mm.
we are at a tipping point in terms of climate catastrophe. So how are we thinking about it, and how can civil society come in to ensure that participation in AI across the supply chain is actually thought
Yeah.
through?
I think that's a key point, the environmental impact. And I was so just briefly, I was going through the AI strategies in African countries, just reading through them, and I
Yeah.
saw that many of them did not actually account for them. So they were speaking about, oh, we need to build data centers and do this and do that. I'm like, okay, you need to do all these things, but have you considered the environmental side effects? And that's what not really accounted for in some of these strategies. So it speaks to the fact that policymakers have not still gotten, I don't know, like a grasp of. There's this idea we need to just get on the bandwagon and ensure that Africa is not left out of the race. We need to do something. We need to be there. But the implications of these things also have not been well thought out as to, okay, what are the side effects and the fallout? So I don't know if Kauna wants to add something before we go to Q&A.
I think you've said it all. For me, what I would just add to what you said, Vincent, about even reaching out when there's a survey and all that, I think another point we should consider is even the language. Most of these things are in English. So how does if people really even understand the framing of whatever you're discussing? I think that was just the point I wanted to add, that even in Africa, we have so many, like in Nigeria, we have over 700 languages. So if you're going to do something like that, how does it cover all these 700 languages and make sure it gets to the people who don't even have a phone, and they can give also their own say when it comes to such decisions in governance? Yeah.
I think that's a vital point, language. And yeah. Yeah, let me know. Okay, so I guess we can go to Q&A and to see if there's anybody with any question or comments based on what we've discussed, any ideas. Is there anyone? There's something in the chat. Okay. Okay, Pierre.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for this super interesting conversation. My first question is going to be very situated. I'm a white person born in France, grown up in France, and educated in the global north. So, what are the key messages and ways that you see today for CSOs and academics who want to contribute meaningfully to those power struggles in Africa and for African communities? So what are the ways that exist right now to engage in a way that would avoid tokenism or validating some other forms of new colonial dominations? And I understand, and saying this, I understand that it's a little bit unfair of me to ask this question to you and put the pressure on you. So perhaps I will situate it just after this. We have a panel conversation with UNESCO CSO and academics network on ethics and policies. So perhaps an additional question is, do you see any kind of relay points with international organizations, whether regional at the African Union level and globally?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Those questions, Pierre. I don't know if you want to comment, Kauna, Angela?
Let me jump in. Pierre, thank you so much for your question. Perhaps in terms of how people can engage without like reinforcing colonialism and coloniality and colonial ideologies is perhaps I would say specifically for academics and the universities in the global north to redistribute the resources and for research, right? To embed this research in because there are no resources for research here locally, like not as much as they exist in the global north. And when you're talking about, for example, environmental decline, we need to actually have evidence-based research that can actually back this up and say, guys, you cannot just think of AI think of the environment like it's a finite resource. This is not a finite resource. It's not an infinite resource. Rather, it comes to an end. It's not an unlimited supply. That's what I mean. It's not an unlimited supply. So how can we actually engage with communities? Look at how it affects them, how it affects the women, how it affects their health, how it affects reproduction, how redistribute the resources. Come embed yourself in local communities and see how the side effects and do that research to be able to build on policy work, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Just buttress what Angela have said, I'll give even myself as an example. I wanted to do my PhD for the longest when I was working for Facebook, and then after I've been writing to just my research is about the mental health and tech workers. What are the best ways using the African approaches to see the interventions that we can create? I've been reaching out, I've been applying and all that. And unfortunately, they will tell you this is not our interest. So when you look at it, even the point of also being from the African race, mostly is, okay, these Africans, the visa issues, the migration issues, these are always a barrier. When you want to travel as a Nigerian, they see your passport, they're like, no, you go, you won't come back. And, it's usually, Vincent is smiling. I know he can relate to that. So
Yeah.
there are so many issues that limits our, even for us, even as Africans, to be part of this conversation when it comes to research, because research is what we really inform even the government, the policies, and all that. When we Africans ourselves are not allowed, are not given the resources and the opportunities to do that. So you see white people from the West coming to Africa to do the research on our own behalf and taking the data. So you can imagine, so when will we Africans ourselves be able to do this by ourselves? Because we understand our issues and we can do it now with the African consciousness that, okay, as an African, we know our problems and this is what we feel the research needs to be done, not people from outside looking through into Africa and be like, okay, this is their issues, let's research on it. And you are funded heavily in millions of dollars to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that also, yeah, I think that's something that is a big challenge in African countries. And as you were speaking about the visa and travel issues, I was like perfectly relatable, in terms of how that can be a big challenge. But I also think to address Pierre's comment around tokenism. So you mentioned the fact that how can CSOs and academics in the global north come to like assist or cooperate and all of that, and not be seen as a tokenist, something that is tokenistic. And I think that's for them for us to have like a balanced, if the partnership can be on this balanced level play, so that it doesn't seem like, oh, it's coming like a gift from the global north, but on the balanced, on a level playing field. And I think African countries also have a role to play in that regard, to also not always be expecting gifts, so to speak, from the global north. African countries also have to sometimes put their money where their mouth is. I know sometimes when it comes to developing AI policies, for instance, some African countries have just left that field to global development partners. So the FCDO in the UK or USAID when it was still functioning, or the EU to come and fund policy making to develop some of these strategies that we are seeing. You see at the end, acknowledgement. We acknowledge the EU for, I'm like, the EU might come to help, but you have to take ownership of these processes, fund them, and do them, and then you can get the partnership. That's good, and that's all fine and good. But also be involved in that process and let there be that level playing field, I think. For the international organizations, like UNESCO, I think they also have a role to play, a big role to play. I think so. I think so. We have a comment in the chat. It says,
Yeah.
I can't unmute here, but to add one point, the communities in the global north have love to talk about inclusion with all the right intentions, but they refuse to confront the industries that make their comfort possible. Extraction is the invincible backbone of the economy, and no amount of diversity training changes that. The material dimension conveniently sidelined. I don't know if you want to say something about that. The material dimension and how that is sidelined. Yeah. So I think, yeah, exactly. In terms of how, when we look at these issues from that holistic perspective, okay, I meant the world of the global north is dependent on the extraction of the global south. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I guess so. Just adding to some of the things that we've said or that we've been speaking about. Yeah. So that becomes a major challenge. We have another question from Ambrose. How do we get policymakers to do bottom-up approaches for addressing the above issues? Any ideas? So I guess this leads us to the final part of this conversation. Like, what is the way forward? How do we, where do we go from?
I wish Rodrigue was here, Vincent, because he's in the government policy making era.
Yeah.
He would be better off equipped to answer this question. But as you say, perhaps we leave it as a question because it's a governance issue. Like when you talk, this is participatory governance, and there's so many gaps in that area when you talk of how already the linguistic issues when people are saying like we're talking to us about AI. Who even wants to be involved in AI? Um, when you're talking about all the digital divide issues about AI, so how do we address with policymakers to do bottom-up approaches? Perhaps, I always think of why do we always think of policies in a very Western way, When you think of, for instance, how Rwanda solved the problem of what was this thing called? After the genocide, when people are coming back together, they used a system called gachacha, which is actually embedded in culture. Like gachacha court system is a way you talk to each other and reconcile. So how can we use African philosophies, African epistemologists to actually think of policy and governance around AI and to talk to communities about AI within systems that exist in our own, what is it called? In our own cultures, in our own knowledge systems. I don't know, maybe that's a far-fetched given that AI is already very distant to people even, but some of the ways of bottom-up approach would be to embed in local knowledge systems.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. Now we're having questions and comment coming in.
Oh,
Okay, so
sorry.
okay, you can read it, please.
In the context of all the really important issues you have identified in relation to power, do you have any thought of the context of AI regulation and the quite recent language used by some of the technology neutral approach?
Mm, mm, yeah. So I think, yeah, for me, I think technology is never neutral. So that conversation really is yeah, it's something I don't subscribe to because technology is not neutral. Whoever develops it, encodes their biases, their preferences, all kinds of things into also all these technologies. So yeah, so I think in that context of AI regulation, I think that so one of the things we need to touch on is that global regulation. Whether do we need like a global regulation of AI, or should we leave it to various nations to do their thing, or should we have like a hybrid approach where different entities, global, regional, national, even local, have their own various systems of governance? But I agree that it's never neutral. I don't know if Kauna or Angela has something to add.
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Vincent, you've answered it. I think it's never neutral. And I read in the comments someone says it's embedded it's never neutral, and it's important to say that because I myself, as someone who have trained AI systems, will tell you it's never neutral because it depends on how I feel in a day. It depends on what I know as an African. It depends on my religion. So it's never neutral. True.
Yeah. And I think there's this illusion that tech companies are always trying to present that front that, oh, this technology is neutral. This technology is all kinds of, all the altruistic reasons that they can give. But as we know, it's not always so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, so I think we've more or less exhausted our conversation point. But I think going forward is the question around policy. African policymakers should just have to invest a lot more. And I don't know how that question of participatoriness involving all kinds of stakeholder voices can be really achieved, practically speaking, because of how difficult the challenges involved. But I think having a go at it and then seeing how it works out and then, correcting for the various shortcomings along the way can really help out to ensure that, policymakers should be more involved in these processes. And I think there's also a lot to do in actually help ensure that policymakers are actually literate in some of these conversations that we talk about, because sometimes policymakers can be, out of touch with the technological developments going on. Yeah.
And I think just to add to that point, and the companies who are selling the AI stories, how glamorous it is, and all that, are the first contacts to these policymakers, unlike the other side. So when there's an issue, they're the first ones to get the opportunity to have a closed door meeting, and the whole narrative changes. Yeah.
Thank you so very much, Kauna. So thank you so much, Kauna, for making it in spite of all the challenge. We really, really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you, Angela, for co-hosting this with me after all the very many months of ups and downs.
Oh, thank you, Vincent. It was amazing. Thank you for also holding the fort when I was not feeling well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so thank you so very much to everyone who was here. So we hand over now to the organizers.
Yes.
Yes, and thank you both so much for all three of you so much for a fantastic panel, and you can see that there's been lots of chat and people exchanging. So thank you all.